The voicemail lasted 43 seconds, and I've listened to it maybe 200 times since then. Not because I needed to, because I needed to remember how close I came to losing everything. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of cold that rolls in off Lake Michigan and makes your knees ache before you even get out of bed. I was 63 years old, retired from 31 years at the water treatment plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I was sitting at my kitchen table signing paperwork that would transfer my savings account, $214,000, into a joint account I had opened with a woman named Sylvia. My son called before I could sign the last page. I almost didn't answer. He'd been distant lately, or I'd told myself that. The truth was, I'd been the one pulling away, slowly, the way you do when you know someone disapproves of a choice you've made and you don't want to hear it. I picked up because it was the third call in 20 minutes. "Dad," he said, "don't do anything today. Please, I need you to come over." "I'm in the middle of something, son." "I know what you're in the middle of." His voice was different, not angry, careful, the way it sounded when he was 12 and told me our dog had gotten hit on Route 50 and he was trying not to cry while he said it. "Please, Dad, just come over. I found something about Sylvia." I should tell you about the 8 months before that phone call because none of what happened makes sense without them. My wife Lorraine passed in February of the year before, 36 years of marriage. She had a stroke on a Thursday evening right after dinner while she was rinsing the plates, gone before the ambulance arrived. The doctors said she probably didn't feel anything. I held on to that. I still hold on to it. The first year was the worst kind of quiet I've ever known. The house, a 3-bedroom ranch on a cul-de-sac that we paid off in 2009, was so still I started sleeping with the TV on just to hear another voice. My son and his wife lived 40 minutes away in Racine. They came every Sunday. My daughter drove up from Chicago once a month. Both of them watched me the way people watch someone standing too close to the edge of something. I joined a grief support group at St. Anthony's that spring. I hadn't been to Mass in years, but the grief counselor there, a quiet woman named Senior. Therese didn't ask about that. She just asked how I was sleeping. Sylvia was in that group. She'd lost her husband, she said, 18 months prior, pancreatic cancer. She had a gentleness to her, a way of sitting very still and listening that made you feel heard without being analyzed. She was 58, she told us, originally from Savannah. Silver hair she wore pulled back. She laughed at the right moments and cried at the right ones, and after the 4th or 5th meeting, she started sitting next to me. I want to be honest about this part because it matters. I wasn't looking for anything. I was barely surviving. But loneliness does something to a person's judgment. It files down the edges of your instincts until you can't feel what used to warn you. I'd been alone for 14 months when Sylvia sat next to me and put her hand briefly on my arm when I talked about Lorraine's laugh. Something in my chest that had been locked opened just slightly. We started having coffee after the meetings, then dinners. By July, she'd met my son. He shook her hand and was polite and quiet. Later in the driveway, he asked me how much I knew about her. I told him I knew plenty. He nodded in that way that means a person is storing something they've decided not to say yet. My daughter had a warmer reaction at first, but by August, when Sylvia and I had talked about her moving in, my daughter called me on a Sunday night and said carefully, "Dad, I just want you to make sure you're not moving too fast." I told her I was 63, not 16, and that I appreciated her concern. The conversation ended politely and left a hairline crack in something between us. Sylvia had a way of gently narrating those concerns back to me in a light that made them seem like overprotectiveness. "They're worried because they love you," she'd say. "But you're not a child, and grief doesn't have a deadline." It felt reasonable every time she said it. It felt like she was the only one who understood what I was going through. In September, she brought up the idea of a joint savings account. She framed it as a gesture of commitment. She explained, planning to sell her condo in Green Bay and wanted somewhere secure to put those funds while she figured out next steps. If we were building a future together, it made sense to start doing things together. She suggested we open a joint account at my bank, pool our savings, and then sit down with a financial planner to talk about what came next. It sounded reasonable. She made most things sound reasonable. I told my son over the phone. There was a pause that lasted long enough that I asked if he was still there. "Yeah, Dad," he said. "I'm here." Another pause. "Okay." Just okay? That was in late September. By the second week of October, we'd opened the joint account. I'd transferred my savings in, and Sylvia had explained that the proceeds from her condo sale were being held up by a title issue but would be deposited within 2 weeks. She showed me paperwork. I didn't look closely enough at any of it. That Tuesday morning, she texted me from what she said was her attorney's office to let me know everything was nearly finalized. She asked me to transfer the funds from the joint account into a new account she'd set up for tax purposes to keep things organized before we met with the financial planner that Thursday. She sent me the account number and routing number in a follow-up text. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the transfer form when my son called for the third time. I drove to Racine in under 40 minutes. My son was waiting at the door before I got out of the car. He's 35, works in IT security. I've never understood exactly what he does, but in that moment I was about to understand it very well. He had his laptop open on the kitchen table. His wife took my coat and brought me coffee without saying much, which told me she already knew what was about to happen. "Sit down, Dad," my son said. I sat. "I want you to know I'm not doing this to hurt you or to tell you what to do. I'm doing this because I love you and I'm scared, so I need you to stay with me through this, okay? Even if it's hard to hear." I nodded. My hands were already cold. He turned the laptop to face me. The first thing he showed me was a LinkedIn profile. The woman in the photo looked like Sylvia. Same silver hair, similar face, but the name was different. Renata Voss. The job history listed was an administrative coordinator at a healthcare company in Indianapolis, last active 8 months ago. "That's not her," I said. "Look at the photo, Dad. Really look." I looked. It was her. The angle was different, the lighting, but it was her face. I would know that face in any room. "She has 2 profiles," my son said. "This one under a different name, different city. I found it because I did a reverse image search on the photo you texted me of the 2 of you at that restaurant in August. Her face pulled up this profile and 3 others. 3 others. He clicked through them. Different names, different cities. Minneapolis, Tulsa, Raleigh. Same woman. Different ages listed on each one. Different careers. Different versions of a life that had been assembled like furniture from a kit, each piece chosen to fit whoever was sitting across from her. I didn't say anything for a long time. "How long have you known?" I finally asked. "I found the first profile 3 weeks ago," he said. "I've been trying to verify it. I didn't want to come to you with something I wasn't sure about. I know how you feel about her. I know how much the last year has cost you." He stopped. "I'm sorry it took me this long." 3 weeks. He had been carrying this for 3 weeks, trying to protect me from being wrong and trying to protect me from being right. "There's more," he said. He pulled up a thread from a forum, one of those online communities for people who've been targeted by romance scammers. A man in his late 50s from Minneapolis had posted his story 18 months earlier. He'd met a woman at a bereavement group. She'd been gentle and understanding. She'd suggested a joint account. The funds transfer request had come 2 days before she disappeared. He'd lost $170,000. The username of a commenter who'd replied with an almost identical story was from Tulsa. The timing matched one of the LinkedIn profiles. I read both posts twice. My coffee sat untouched and went cold. "She's still texting me," I said. "She texted me an hour ago." "I know," my son said. "Don't respond yet. She's waiting for me to do the transfer." "I know, Dad." I put the phone face down on the table. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes from realizing you've been chosen as a target, not because you were special or interesting, but because you were vulnerable, because grief had made you porous, because loneliness had worn down the thing inside you that was supposed to ask questions. I sat in my son's kitchen and felt that humiliation settle into my chest like something wet and heavy, and I had to breathe around it very carefully. "I need a minute," I said. "Take all the time you need." I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I came back out and said, "Tell me what to do." My son had already been in contact with the Kenosha County Sheriff's Department. He'd spoken to someone in their financial crimes unit who had asked him to have me come in as soon as possible. He'd also flagged the suspicious transfer request with my bank's fraud department that morning before I arrived, which meant the funds in the joint account had been temporarily frozen pending review. That detail saved me. We drove to the sheriff's department together. I gave a statement. The detective I spoke with, a woman who had been doing financial crimes work for 11 years, sat across from me with a legal pad and didn't once make me feel foolish for having believed Sylvia. She told me they'd seen this pattern many times. Bereavement groups, she said, had become targeted recruiting grounds. The perpetrators were skilled, patient, and they understood grief in a clinical way. Not because they'd experienced it, but because they'd studied it. She asked me to keep my phone on and to respond to Sylvia's next message normally, without indicating anything had changed. That was the hardest thing I've ever been asked to do. Sylvia texted again at 2:40 that afternoon. Everything was finalized, she wrote. The financial planner had moved their Thursday appointment up. Could I go ahead and initiate the transfer that evening so the funds would clear by morning? She added a heart at the end, the way she always did. I typed back, "Sure. I'll take care of it tonight. Talk later." She responded with 2 hearts. I set the phone down and didn't pick it up again for 6 hours. The sheriff's department coordinated with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center because the account number Sylvia had sent me for the transfer traced to a bank in another state and flagged a pattern connected to an ongoing federal investigation. I won't detail every step of what followed because some of it is still working through the legal system. What I can tell you is that Sylvia, whose real name, it turned out, was not Sylvia and not Renata Voss, and not any of the other names she'd used, was apprehended at a residence in Glendale, Arizona, 6 days after that Tuesday in October. There were 2 other people arrested with her. The man in Minneapolis got some of his money back. Not all of it. The man in Tulsa got nothing. I got all of mine because my son had called before I signed the last page. 43 seconds. People ask me what the warning signs were, and I have to be careful when I answer because I don't want to suggest that grief makes you stupid. It doesn't. Grief makes you human in a way that certain people know how to exploit. But looking back, there were things I could name. She always had a reason. Her finances were in transition. There was always a condo being sold, a title issue, an estate being settled. Always a reason why her money was somewhere else, somewhere pending, somewhere almost here, but not yet. She was generous in small ways, picking up coffee, bringing things to my house, but always had an explanation for why the larger things weren't yet in place. She met my family exactly twice and managed each visit with the precision of someone running a performance rather than living a life. Afterward, she'd have a gentle reframe for whatever concern had been raised. My son was protective. My daughter was still grieving and projecting. She never said anything overtly negative, just enough to keep me oriented toward her and slightly away from them. And she moved fast in a way that felt like passion but was actually pressure. Looking back, the joint account conversation came before we'd known each other 8 months. The transfer request came within days of the account being opened. Each step was timed carefully, but in the moment it felt like momentum, like something good finally moving forward. I don't say any of this to make myself feel better. I say it because if you're reading this and something small in your chest just moved, if one or two of those things sounded familiar, I want you to hear it from someone who has been exactly where you are. It is worth pausing. It is worth one uncomfortable conversation with someone who loves you. The embarrassment of having that conversation is nothing compared to what's on the other side of not having it. Thanksgiving that year was at my son's house in Racine. His wife made Lorraine's green bean casserole from the recipe card my son had photographed on his phone years earlier, just to have it. My daughter drove up from Chicago and brought her boyfriend, who I was meeting properly for the first time. We ate at a table that was too small for all of us and had to bring in a folding table from the garage, and nobody minded. After dinner, when the kids were watching football and my daughter was in the kitchen doing dishes, my son sat down next to me on the couch. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm getting there," I said. He nodded. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner," he said. "Those 3 weeks..." "Don't," I told him. "You came. That's what matters." He looked at the game for a moment. Then he said, "She picked you because she thought you were alone. I want you to know that you're not." I didn't trust myself to say much after that. I put my hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was small, and we watched the rest of the quarter without talking, and it was the most at home I'd felt in almost 2 years. The house on the cul-de-sac is still mine. I have not put it on the market. The water stain on the ceiling of the back bedroom that Lorraine always wanted fixed is still there, and I've decided it can stay for now. Some things don't need to be changed just because they could be. I still go to the grief group on Tuesday evenings. Senior, Therese asked once gently if I was doing okay after everything. I told her I was. She said, "Good, we need you here." I think she meant it, and I think she was right, and I think she was right, and I think the difference between then and now is that I believe it too. Trust the people who call 3 times. I've thought a lot about what made me vulnerable, and I've stopped being ashamed of the answer. It wasn't stupidity. It wasn't weakness in any way I'm embarrassed by. It was grief, plain and human, and grief has a way of making a person reach toward warmth the way a plant turns toward a window in winter. That reaching isn't a character flaw, but it is something that certain people know how to use. What I keep coming back to is this. Every step of what Sylvia did worked because of how reasonable it looked. The joint account, the pending condo sale, the transfer for tax purposes, none of it was invisible. I just wasn't asking the right questions. And I wasn't asking the right questions because somewhere in those 8 months I had stopped trusting my own judgment and started trusting hers instead. That's the slow thing. That's the thing you don't notice while it's happening. My son noticed. He sat with what he found for 3 weeks before he called me. Not because he was unsure of the evidence, but because he understood the cost of being right. He knew that showing me the truth meant watching me a druth, meant watching me a druth, meant watching me absorb something painful, and he chose to do it anyway. That took a kind of moral steadiness I don't think I fully appreciated until I was sitting across from him at that kitchen table, trying to breathe around what I was seeing on that laptop screen. He did what was right over what was easy, and in my experience, those two things don't always line up the way we'd like them to. What saved me financially was a frozen account. What saved me in every other way was a son who paid attention, who used what he knew how to do, his skills, his tools, his patience, in service of someone he loved. There's something worth sitting with there. Intelligence without the willingness to act on it is just information. He acted. He called 3 times until I picked up. And I've thought about Lorraine through all of this. She would have seen through Sylvia in a week, maybe less. She had that in her, a quiet, unhurried way of reading people that I always trusted more than my own. I spent 36 years leaning on that, and when she was gone, I didn't know how to replace it. I tried to replace it with someone new, and I nearly paid for that in full. What I know now is that the people who love you are not obstacles to the life you want. They are the life you want. My son's 3 phone calls, his wife's quiet kindness with the coffee, my daughter driving up from Chicago. None of that happened because they approved of my choices. It happened because they showed up anyway. That's the thing that actually holds a person together when everything else turns out to be a performance. I still go to the grief group, I still sit in the same chair, and when new people come in, looking hollowed out and grateful for any warmth in the room, I watch them the way my son once watched me, carefully, without judgment, and ready to say something hard if it ever becomes necessary. Trust takes time. Anyone who tries to rush it is telling you something without meaning to.